Hello, and welcome to today's live chat, which is coming to you from this room I'm currently in. Now, I've got a big window here beside me. I've got an old camera. This computer was bought in January 2013. So the computer is now 9.5 years old since I bought it. Mind you, it was the top of the range when I got it. And so the image is not particularly good. Having got the apologies out of the way, this being a live chat, you can use it to actually ask questions if you want to, relating to things about history. And I'll try and do this relatively frequently. As some of you may know, I was in Ukraine, and I came back to Poland, and I'll be going back to Ukraine this week. At least that's what the plan is. And one of the questions is that I sort of got involved in this. I put up a video related to the Foreign Legion. I wrote it the very same day that it was announced, and then I went outside and I sort of filmed myself talking about it. And as a result of that, I then came up with more ideas, and people started asking me questions, and I started helping people get there. I did offer to do this in the very first video. Now, one of the questions that the things is what type of people are actually doing this? And I think I've spoken to lots of people who are there. I deliberately have refrained from interviewing people. I said we can do it when the war ends, but we won't do it until then, and even off camera. But there's a number of people said that they will do it afterwards, but not during the conflict itself. So the first thing I have to say is it's the age thing. Now, obviously, people need to have some type of military experience. If they haven't got this basic military experience, then it's then not of a lot of use. There's not really facilities to train people. Or what's needed is training Ukrainians, yes, by using foreigners to do that, and that does go on, and that's happening in various places throughout the country. But it's largely done on an ad hoc basis. Unfortunately, the organization in Ukraine is not good at all. Hello, Tuna. And so that's the number one thing I would have to say. The organization, as well as many other things related to in Ukraine, this is a bureaucrat's dream. It's full of paper reasons why things just cannot be done. Anyway, to return to the type of people who are there, right, the majority are in the 40s. So that's the first thing, the majority, overwhelming majority. Some are old, some are in the 50s. I was at a place a couple of weeks ago. I was the oldest person there, but there were people who weren't all that much younger than I am. So that would be the very first thing. Some clearly, obviously, you get to this age and maybe they're not in supreme physical fitness, but they are still pretty fit. So I have to say as well, I suspect the place I was at, I was in the worst condition. I just said suspect, just in case anybody who was there wants to start arguing that they're in worse condition than I am. And so that's first thing. The thing is, the motivation is what I really wanted to talk about. What motivates people to do it? Now, there's clearly a very clear political and life ideology which goes through everybody, and it's a case of what this conflict is a clear case of right and wrong, whereas there's plenty of problems within the Ukrainian state, and I'm sure there's plenty of corruption and all the rest of it which appears to have existed, but it's nothing compared to that which is now being brought in. And well, I don't know if I was much use either. So this it's a black and white case. It's also the evil of the particularly after what we've seen with these dreadful crimes that have been committed by the occupying forces, and in some of the intercepted messages. And yesterday I was just listening to somebody who was talking to his mother, and so we've got to wipe them all out, and we've got to kill every last one of them. From somebody on the ground, he might have been drinking or something like that. He might have been a psychopath normally, but when we've got people within the government, when you've got the thing which I've published from Timotei Sergeyev, who openly is arguing for genocide, then we have then there clearly is something that. So I think that the people that I've come across are all highly motivated by humanitarian factors. So this is progressive ideology that they are maybe they don't really want to say that they say we want to sort of change, make sort of a liberal democracy which believes in sort of things that that person may want to believe in. But certainly there is a desire, humanitarian desire, to actually defend people, other people, from evil. So that is utterly clear. So on a political spectrum, just about everybody is somewhere progressive. So it could be centrist ideologies. The person I was hanging out with, whose name I won't mention, quite a lot in Ukraine, but he was support of the Republican Party in the United States, but totally said that Trump was the worst thing that had ever happened to the Republican Party. So that sort of puts him where he is. Other people from the United Kingdom been supporters mainly, I would say, of the Liberal Party, if anything, mainly. But those have talked about politics too, because in most cases I think it's largely people who have this humanitarian ideology. And one thing I do see also is the people I get is people from all sorts of countries actually have contacted me, because they do see this. Now, Jeff says something here very curious: is why do sensible people run to wars not in their backyard? I mean, I've had people say this to me, and I said this is that okay. It's not my backyard yet, but as a historian, I can look to what happened in the past. If Hitler had been stopped in 1935, the Second World War wouldn't have happened. And all the things that happened as a result of the Second World War, a direct result of the Second World War, starting with, for example, the problems in the Middle East with Israel. Israel probably wouldn't have happened in the Second World War. We have the communist domination of Central Europe, which lasted for 50 years. We had all the maybe it's going off the subject a little bit, but the colonial wars from Angola, Mozambique, Vietnam, and all the others, which happened is a proxy wars for the communist regime in the Soviet Union. Maybe they wouldn't have happened. I mean, it's hard to say, of course. Maybe I'm just coming off it, but without a doubt, the Second War, if Hitler had been stopped only 4 years earlier, when the first thing that was clearly in violation of treaty obligations, which was the occupation of the Rhineland, then that if it'd been stopped, then Hitler himself also, then that could have been that could have happened. Rudyard writes, "The world's not perfect, and if you want to help people, you want to help them on your own terms. Is that wrong?" Yeah, good point. That is, if I want to help somebody, to want to help them on my own terms, I'm going to say that is actually to a certain extent wrong. Because one thing I was thinking about today, this happens to me occasionally, is start thinking of the way missionaries behave, and sort of and they'll say, "Well, yeah, well, we'll go and set up a clinic to help people who are ill, but we're going to try and convert them to our religion, which is usually some form of Christianity." And I would say that is wrong, because if people do want to help people, then I would expect them to do it and respect their religion at the same time. So when I go there, I don't expect anything in return. I mean, it'd be It would be nice, of course, when I was hitchhiking, if somebody had actually stopped and picked me up. I would have appreciated that. Um, as but other than that, I don't think that anybody's actually going there to actually put in their own terms. I think what is wanted is really to help. And so, why did Orwell and Hemingway volunteer for the Spanish Civil War? Idealism, yes. Well, I mean, I haven't read Hemingway, but I have read every. No, I wouldn't say I've read everything Orwell wrote, but some of his literary stuff is really horrendous. His literary reviews are awful. But for example, Homage to Catalonia, I read this in the school, sorry, my university library, in 1983. It was one of the first things I actually read in the university library. And so, you can see from what mind you, Orwell came. Orwell's a bit more of an extremist in some ways, because if you read the book, The Homage to Catalonia, he wants to kill a fascist, and this is something he's got in him. And I have not heard this from anybody. I've never heard anybody want to kill an orc. Or a Russian. Most people prefer them. I mean, the Ukrainians tend not to call them Russians so much, as they use the more insulting term, the orcs. But as far as the foreigners, I've never heard anybody say that. And I mean, even had somebody sitting there. I just hope it doesn't come to this. I'm going to have to use the pull the trigger. So it is. I think this is one of the problems with people who are more motivated. Then again, with George Orwell, if you read other things he wrote, for example, when he's in 1940, he writes about he's sitting in London somewhere at the time, and there's bombers above him. And he's trying to find out why are they trying to kill him, and what have they got against him? Probably perfectly civilized people, seeing as they could fly planes. So yeah, I mean, that's a good one. So Doxy Girl writes, do you think any of the Baltic countries, Poland, will be invaded by Russia? No, I don't. I don't think that. I have no doubt whatsoever that the fascist regime in the Kremlin would want to invade the Baltic states above all, but it's not going to happen because of NATO, and NATO outnumbers Russia by a factor of something like 8 or 9 to 1 in just about everything. Just about everything. And NATO would absolutely pulverize Russia if it came to a war. And not only that, it's outnumbered, but it's got superiority in equipment at the same time. What it has less of, Russia has shorter supply routes, because obviously a lot of stuff that NATO has comes from the United States. But I really do not think that is likely. And there's another thing you have to bear in mind. One has to bear in mind is that Russia is a kleptocracy. The Russian leadership gets its money from stealing from the Russian people. So it's not going to attack or even destroy the things that it owns. Hermann Goering once said something along the lines that he'd lost more than most people, because he'd lost all the stuff that he'd stolen through the period of the Third Reich, whereas most people had nothing to begin with. Now, that's not a very nice way of putting it, of course, but that's probably the mentality of people like this. Putin started off life in abject poverty. But he's got a lot of money. Why? He's got a lot of money from stealing from other people who live in abject poverty and continue to live in abject poverty because his regime has done next to nothing for them. When you think of the amount of people in Russia who do not have access to medical care, for example. So I use that as one example. An article I read in Novaya Gazeta in February, saying that was I can't remember the number. That was 19 or 13. No, it was 19 million people. I think so. Whatever it was, but like 17 or 19 million people in Russia don't have access to ambulances. Never mind medical care, ambulance. So if you have something happens to you, you get hit by a roaming walrus or something, then that's it. You can't get an ambulance ticket. You have to get a taxi or something, or whatever. So this is. I mean, the cost of 1 hour's war in Ukraine just 1 hour, would pay for everybody in Russia to have access to this type of an ambulance, but obviously clearly for the leadership who's stolen all this cash from the Russian people, then that's not an option. What is an option? But I don't think the money that they've stolen has been sent abroad. It's been sent abroad deliberately, and so therefore I don't think that would end up. I don't think they would actually attack the Baltic countries and Poland. But I mean, I'm in Poland right now, and there's a certain amount of fear. I wouldn't say a lot, but there's a certain amount. I think what they're more interested in doing is doing what we thought the Soviets wanted to do at the beginning of the 80s, for example, the end of the 70s, which was to overtake, getting control foreign countries. So then it was done. For example, if you look at the 70s, like Vietnam, Laos, Cambodia, Angola, Mozambique, and other countries which fell to, and they're trying to do this now, but by influencing political use social media to influence them, get their candidates voted in other countries. So I would say. Anyway, right. So sorry. How do I? Sorry, no. Just the other one. I think that Orwell and his socialist ideals quickly became disillusioned in the fight. Undoubtedly, if you read Homage to Catalonia, which I have to say that I lived in Spain, I studied in Spain. I would say the Spanish Civil War is often said of my specialization is 36 to 45, include the Spanish Civil War. What you have with Orwell is that the Spanish Civil War came about as an attempted coup d'etat, which failed by the right. And then what happened was that on the government side, in many places, which was the government itself lost control, and you had communists taking over. And so what Orwell wrote about in he went there to fight fascism. And when he was on his day off or his weekend off, which he had in Barcelona, he had to fight with the anarchists against the communists. So he couldn't see the point. So there was a civil war within the civil war, whereas on the other side, General Franco, who was important, but he certainly wasn't the leader of the fascist side. He came because of the one, but others just sort of had accidents or died or whatever. So he came to the fore as the only candidate. I'm not suggesting there was anything dodgy about the way the others died, but that is what happened. So the Spanish government, the legal government, the one which won the election of February 1936, was destroyed to a large extent by the communists. Would this have meant that if the communists hadn't have done this, would Franco have won? Maybe not. It's hard to say. I wouldn't say, because I mean, obviously the huge amount of support. But if there'd been two things, if the French and British had supported the legal Spanish government and the communists hadn't done what they did, and Stalin had undermined the Spanish government, then I believe that the Spanish government would have won the civil war and been able to wipe out the coup, the coup d'etat. Anyway, that's just my opinion. Jeff writes, wars are so horrible and change people for the worst. Both sides devolve into tribalism, and the crimes against civilians become commonplace. That's it, because us and them, part of this us and them is the use of names. We don't say their names, we use other forms. For example, so I mean, thing is this, I don't want to blame Russians deliberately, because this fight is to liberate Russia also. Not that I don't think that's actually possible, but I would like to think it is that. So unless Russia is liberated, then this threat will continue to exist. And the liberation of Russia would mean other things as well. I mean, that this money which is now being stolen from the Russian people, and it's ending up buying houses in Eaton Square and mega yachts and all the rest of it, then this would be used to provide things such as basic infrastructure for people in Russia, such as healthcare, such as roads and all the rest of it. I published a video this week on Spiridon Putin, who is the grandfather of Vladimir Putin, and I got one of the photographs came from Google Maps. You can go to the village on Google Maps where Putin actually lives. Come so you can see what it looks like there in the photographs. It doesn't look very impressive. Mind you, it's a place in the countryside. There's plenty of places in the countryside that don't look impressive. I have traveled a little bit in Russia, and I can show you that there's places, big places, that look very similar. In fact, I've got some of my own photographs on Belgorod, which I might leave a link to on one future video, and you can see what it looks like there. I mean, it's pretty dismal. And so if you go to these big cities like Moscow or Petersburg, yeah, it's the same as anywhere else. But if you go to the countryside, then the people are living in not particularly pleasant surroundings. I've got to say this as well. Also, I've got in Ukraine as well. I mean, if you go into the countryside, then really, or even small towns, you'd be rather shocked at things like the lack of roads and the communal housing state it's in, and this type of thing. So these are all problems. I would also say, for example, because I was going to think about the Falklands War, and during the Falklands War as well, the word Argentinian was not actually referred to. There were other words which I'm not going to repeat now. The word Argy was something I didn't hear until after the war. But I know it was in the UK during the war. But it's similar words, negative words, which I'm not going to repeat, were used. Tuna writes, if the bomb drops, numbers won't matter. Yes, I mean, that's true. Yes, there is a risk, and I don't try and pretend otherwise. I just watched something on Russia. One, sorry, get my languages mixed up. The main channel, the main propaganda channel, the BBC One of Russia, which there was this woman called Margaret something. I've seen her, quite forgotten her surname now. But anyway, she was arguing for nuclear war. She was saying we can't accept this. Well, of course she can't accept. She's a multi-millionaire. But what about these poor people in the countryside who have nothing? Will they agree to it, or are they so blind? Because the people who go for nationalism are normally the poorest. The tribalism affects the poor. It tends not to affect the rich so much. The rich are those that control the poor. There is a risk, but seeing as the thing with Russia is that the people who are making the threats are the people who've stolen money and sent it abroad, or misappropriated money anyway, sent it abroad. So do I view this as a kind of civil war? What do you mean? What's happening in Ukraine? No, it's not a civil war. It's a war between I don't think when they say about the separatists, undoubtedly, with amongst the separatists that exist in places like Donetsk and Lugansk and the Crimea, there were people who, but you can actually look at who voted for who in the Ukrainian elections. And if you look at the separatist parties, for example, in the Crimea, there was a separatist party. There was a party that wanted union with Russia, but it never did any. I mean, that's one thing I think that actually gives it away. And there's another thing which is important. I heard nobody else mention this, is that the Russian speakers are largely the colonists, right? So let's now use a British example. When the British went to Africa in the 19th century and they stole all the land from the local inhabitants. Now, when Kenya became independent in 1964, I think it was, and there were the British settlers, the grandchildren of these people had stolen the land, were still occupying the highlands and all the best land, and the British government realised that this wasn't a good idea. So what it did is it made compulsory purchase orders, got these people off the land, then handed it over to the Kenyan government. And so the settlers then or the children of the settlers returned. That's what happened. The thing is this, that as Russia has expanded from its base area, so this is a process which took place over a couple of hundred years, these are the people who went out and then they took over the land which belonged to the native peoples. However, in the case of Ukraine, and certainly in the case of Donetsk and Lugansk, large amounts of this were for two reasons. One, it was because of the industrial growth, because of the area, the mining, the industry. But the second reason is because of the famine, which was deliberately caused by the Kremlin. Let's be utterly clear that some 3.9 million people died in a famine which was deliberate, and so therefore these are the colonists who came in as a result of this famine to a large extent. So that is something I think which is forgotten. Doxy Girl writes, how long do I think that countries like the United States, United Kingdom will give weapons and funding to Ukraine? I think under the current government in the United States and in the UK, this will continue indefinitely until there is a peace. There's a peace agreement. If I think it would stop in the case of, let's say that the Kremlin occupied all of Ukraine, but the people kept fighting. I don't think they would actually support partisan groups at all. They might support them morally, but certainly wouldn't be giving them weapons. But I think as long as the war is in its current state, as it is at present, then I think many countries, it's not just UK and US, but it's not even just NATO, but we've got stuff from Australia. There's something from Brazil after it turned up. So it's lots of countries are giving support to Ukraine in this crisis. And anyway, so Christopher says, the whole thing was set up from the Kremlin before 2014. There was no war. Sorry, I didn't answer the question earlier on. The 2014 situation is completely set up by the Kremlin. As it was with the invasion of Crimea. There was nothing existed beforehand. There was no problems of this nature. Some of you may have been to Donetsk to see 10 years ago to see the football. So England played there, and so this is completely set up by the Kremlin. There's no not only that. I mean, the leaders of the two People's Republics are both Russians. They were born in Russia. They turned up to occupy this ground. Nonetheless, I do appreciate that there's probably a significant minority who supports Russia or the Kremlin, the current leadership in the Kremlin, in Donetsk and Lugansk, right? Right. So Neil says, in the light of Putin's invasion of Ukraine, do NATO countries need to establish and expand an equivalent of the Ukraine's territorial army in order to dissuade Putin from escalating the current conflict? Yeah. Okay, Neil. I think it's possibly a bit outside of my area, that one, but I would say yes. But one thing I would really be keen to say is this is not to relax standards, and therefore there's one thing. I remember a friend of mine in the 80s, he was arguing, he had never been in the army himself, but he was arguing that there should be national service and everybody should be able to do it. My own opinion is that with volunteer armies, that's better. One of the problems with the British system with the territorial army is that if you go in our territorial armies workplace, you've got a normal job, so you work in a factory, so let's say from Monday to Friday, and on Friday night you go off and you have some training. Now, if your training is a case of just going to an army base and then you're doing something like you're learning how guns work or something like that, or you're getting lessons in map reading or whatever, that's one thing. But when you go off and do a battle camp, which I think the minimum is 6 a year, over a weekend, then the thing is this, is that when people, not only is that's the minimum, but the thing is that I know there's pressure for people to do it every single weekend. The thing is people turn up on Monday, they're exhausted, because if you go off and have a battle camp on the Friday night, a Friday evening, so you muster at say 7:15 or something like that, then you get driven off somewhere and you end up there about 11 o'clock, and then you start your battle. And you might only sleep 3 or 4 hours. Well, okay, if you've got to come back and work in a factory operating machinery on the Monday morning when you're totally exhausted, that is one of the reasons why it's very difficult to actually do this. Another thing which has happened within the British Army, which I am aware of, is, for example, the case of reservists being sent to Afghanistan. Well, I mean, obviously people on the taxpayer is paying for something, it's paying for value for money. But if you've got reservists being sent off to Afghanistan, well, what the employer's going to say? What's going to happen is this: is the employers are saying, no, if you work from, obviously I need work, so I need people to drive my lorries and make my whatever I'm making. But at the same time, I want people to do the job. I don't want people to be exhausted. So, but I do think that expansion, but I believe it's probably expanded as best it can. I cannot see, within my own experience, how it could be made any bigger. Tuna writes, I can't imagine that this has ever listened. That Putin, I presume, has ever listened to the wishes of the average McDonald's customer in Moscow. Yeah, probably not. Yeah, I've got happy memories of McDonald's in Moscow, as you may have heard in my video on that subject. And okay, Jeff says, do you think Zelensky telling Azov no surrender is his way of getting rid of a big thorn in his side he had issued Azov for years, publicly even? No, there's been no orders not to surrender. I mean, but in the circumstances, I mean, it's very easy for me to sit here in the comfort of this room here, and knowing I've got a full cupboard of food outside and nobody's threatening me with anything to talk of surrender. It's going to be much more difficult if I were in the situation. But if it's been made clear that that they intend to kill people and who surrender. So if you do that, then there is no surrender. So you've got to fight into the last round, and you might even want to consider taking the last round for yourself. Although, I mean, to say that, it's very, very, very difficult. I'll give you somebody I knew. His name was Walter. He was born in Vienna in 1919, and he was a refugee from Hitler. He turned up in the United Kingdom in the end of 1938, and he joined the British Army as a Pioneer Corps, and then he went to join the Tank Regiment, and he became a paratrooper. And he jumped over France, 6th of June 1944, 7th of June he was taken prisoner. They were totally lost in the middle of nowhere, didn't know what was happening. And anyway, so he had a strong German accent, and everybody knew he was German, and he thought, well, the best thing is, not he was Jewish, but the best thing for him to do would be to kill himself. But he said he just didn't have the courage to do it, and so he didn't. And as it turned out, nobody betrayed him, but and somebody could have betrayed him in a POW camp. But it's very easy to sort of talk of things like this. I mean, the suicide and all the rest of it, not surrendering. But I think it must take a huge amount of courage to actually do something like that. Anyway. Yeah, so Christopher writes, undoing the sins of Stalin is a good place to start. Yes, it would be, actually, I agree with that. the problem is now in Russia is that the current regime in its anti-Russian stance. And when you've got the people such as Memorial who will try to remember the hundreds of thousands of people who were murdered by the Stalin regime. Then on top of that, you've got things like the Holodomor, 3.9 million or 54.6 million, depends how things are counted. You've got these terrible, but these people today, the ones who are being persecuted in Russia are those who are doing research on these crimes. And can you imagine that, for example, somebody like myself, for example, last week I was at a place, did some filming in Poland on death camp home in Magneto, and so I would be, I wouldn't have courage, of course, I just go and do something else. But people are trying to record, right, things that I do, and then find yourself being persecuted. And there have been cases where they, for example, they poisoned people within Memorial, or there's another one where they accuse people of pedophilia and false accusation, and then these people are locked up and killed in prison. And so that is a war against the Russian people, and that is, I mean, as far as Stalin's concerned, I just cannot understand after what this character did, how anybody would want to look back on Stalinism as being a good thing. I can't think of anything which was positive about the Stalinist regime whatsoever. Maybe somebody can think of something. Maybe there is something, like, had the same bus tickets throughout Russia or something like that. That might be one argument. But if that is the case, it was a horrendous regime, and what Putin is trying to do. I mean, without a doubt, the Putinist regime has brought benefits to many people in Russia. That's not just for the rich. There are, I have said, okay, this money has left people in abject poverty, yes, but I mean, the state they lived in even 25 years ago was probably far worse. But all the same is they are not participating in the benefits of the mineral wealth of the country, and Russia is effectively, as economies work, it's a third world economy, even though it has the capacity to be a first world economy. And the reason it's a third world, because it's just being exploited for its resources. As Stalin stated in 1928, life is more joyous. Indeed, it is. I'm currently reading Anne Applebaum's book called Red Famine, just what's it called? Red Famine, and I always argue that the Holodomor was not an assault on Ukraine as such, and I've now changed. She's changed my mind on that subject. I'm beginning to think, from the evidence that she's presented, I'm beginning to think that maybe that is the case. It is an attack on the on the people of Ukraine. Historic is here. Sorry, so motivated by the outstanding leadership of Zelensky, who has unified the nation. Indeed, he has. And now I will introduce historic here, because we know each other. We haven't seen each other in 11 years plus. 2008. When was that? That's not it. Oh no, it's 14 years ago now, isn't it? Anyway, so good. I don't think Zelensky's of Churchillian mode. I'd put it the other way around. I'd say Churchill was of a Zelensky mode. I mean, the two, to me, Zelensky's far above Churchill. I mean, he's talking incomparably above Churchill, in my opinion. He's an incredible character from what he's done. I do appreciate he was brought up, his training was about being an actor, and he studied law, so it's probably the best two things to actually do for somebody of this nature. But to me, he's an incredible leader, and he showed incredible courage. And you can compare him, for example, to the likes of Putin. Nobody knows what Putin is. He's probably in some bunker somewhere, quivering with fear. And in fact, I learned today that in the beginning of on the 24th of February, when the invasion took place, and they didn't know who was there, that arms were actually handed out to people in the cabinet and things of this nature. So there's a famous photograph of Allende at the time, 1970, 11th September 1973, when you've got the Pinochet coup, and you see somebody with Allende carrying a weapon. And although Allende doesn't have one, well, in this case, it seems that during this attempted invasion, or what it was an invasion, sorry, an attempt to actually storm the palace or whatever to take him, and the weapons were handed out to him. So great. So thanks very much for listening, and I shall end that here. I'll tell you what else I'm doing. I'm currently writing a thing on a person called Horst Schumann, who was an SS doctor at first of all at Grafeneck T4 program, sent from there to Pianist Sonnenstein, and he ended up in Auschwitz, and got somehow what happened to him after the war. So I'm currently writing that up possibly today. In fact, it was sunny outside, and it's the 1st of May, so I heard there was something in the street, so I'm going to see what happened there, and then I'm going to try to do some work on my motorhome. But then I might come and do that. And I've also done something on which I'll keep this back for a live. In fact, I've done something on the oil sanctions, and why I'm going to compare oil sanctions, potential oil sanctions, with Russia now with what's happened with Iran, and which is rather, which is historic. So I mean, which is rather curious, and this is the reason I don't think oil sanctions will work. But anyway, all the best. So thanks very much for watching. There will not be a video tonight. The next one I've got planned actually is in a week's time, but I will do some live ones. And I realize that this is obviously it's Sunday, so I can do it in lunchtime, dinner times, I would say, or almost that, because you're in the UK and it's not quite. But this is a good time for me. So thanks for watching, and all the best to everybody. Bye for now.